My favorite gameplay mechanic is, without question, choice. Games are interactive by nature, so while you could say that you as a player are constantly choosing things like which direction you walk, what weapon you equip, whether or not to pick up a collectible, etc., I'm not really interested in those sorts of choices. I really mean the kinds of decisions that have an impact beyond simply whether or not you win or what your score is. Games have been doing this for a very long time, one classic example being in Super Metroid, where at the end of the game you have a choice whether or not to save some of the animals who helped you during the mission.
You can opt not to if you're evil, or a speedrunner, or both.
But I feel like games in general have fallen into this lazy kind of good versus evil choice making for a long time. It's wild to me that people ever praised the first BioShock for having deep and compelling choices when the only real choice you make is whether to murder children or not.
Oh, but if you murder the children, you get more gamer juice.
Oh boy, what a dilemma.
The good versus evil dichotomy isn't entirely useless, and in rare cases employing that binary of choice can make for some actually compelling things. Look no further than Undertale's pacifist route, where you bring everyone together, versus its genocide route, where you kill everything in sight, and get a more hollow gameplay experience, but with added commentary about the ethics of doing bad things in virtual space. Generally, though, telling the player that they can choose to either be a hero or a villain, and promising a similar experience out of the two is not only dishonest to reality, but it's also boring and lacks nuance. People just don't pick the evil option when it's spelled out for them this way, unless it's their second time playing and they want to see what happens, or they're substituting being contrarian for having a personality.
I'm kidding. Mostly.
I was really refreshed to play some of the games published by Telltale Games in the 2010s, because I think they helped push the concept of moral choices in games in the right direction.
And I want to quickly preface the rest of this script by acknowledging that Telltale Games, as it exists today, is not a company you should support with your money.
In 2018, Telltale announced its closure and fired most of their staff without severance, adequate notice, or extension of health benefits. And this was after years of toxic work environments and crunch.
This move was exploitative and abusive to their workers, and I do not defend this practice in any way. I maintain that the new Telltale owes a debt to the people who made the old Telltale what it was, and unless that debt gets paid in full, I do not recommend purchasing any titles that Telltale owns the rights to, including the Batman series, Puzzle Agent, and The Wolf Among Us.
I also want to mention that Telltale has a history that dates back further than the choice-based games I'd like to discuss today, so it's safe to assume when I use phrases like Telltale style, I'm probably just referring to their episodic titles post-2012. Strong Bad's cool game for attractive people is unfortunately a topic I'll have to save for another time.
And while I will be doing a lot of praising of Telltale in this talk, I want to stress again that my praise really only extends to the games as art, as pieces of creative media, not as marketable products.
I want to at least acknowledge The Walking Dead because, surprise, surprise, it's the best series Telltale has ever put out. That's not my hot take.
My hot take is that the whole thing is good, not just season 1.
The story of Clementine, a girl forced to suddenly grow up in a world where survival is no longer a guarantee, is fantastic, and I like where it goes. I like trying to teach her important lessons in a limited span of time during the game's first season. I like that she comes into her own in the second season and how she still maintains much of her innocence even when you're not the one making the decisions. And yeah, I like how she's not your puppet anymore in season 3. She's been doing things on her own between seasons and you get caught up with her story through the perspective of a new protagonist. While this approach to the narrative definitely has drawbacks, I enjoyed seeing how the choices you made in 2 affect what Clementine does when she's on autopilot in 3. There's probably some discussion to be had about what the game is saying about teenagers and growing up or something, but I'm not ready to tackle that for a 30-plus hour series I haven't replayed in a few years.
All I'll say is that I liked it, and Javier Garcia's story is gripping, and it couldn't have been told through Clementine, and it made me cry, so I'm really glad they didn't skip it.
Season 4, despite its rocky development, turned out to be an excellent conclusion in a universe where conclusions are hard to fathom. Not going to pretend the games didn't have really bad glitches or narrative choices that definitely do have problems, but they were going for something good and did it well enough to get a pass from me.
I genuinely could go on for a long time about The Walking Dead's themes, characterization, and so on, but this game really got me seriously thinking about ethical dilemmas for the first time ever.
I played through the first season so many times, and I was absolutely hooked on showing it to my friends to see how they played and what drove their choices. I would invite them over just to play an episode or two so I could talk with them about how the characters made them feel, why they picked certain things, and really dig into the morally gray what-ifs the story gave us. In a way, the series helped me empathize with people who handle problems differently than I do, and gave me a sort of visual reference for how my choices in real life will affect people.
I was a very misguided young adult, so this was more of a boon than it sounds.
So after experiencing what The Walking Dead had to offer, I was thirsty for more. I used to tell people that SBCG4AP made me respect Telltale, The Walking Dead made me love Telltale, and The Wolf Among Us pushed me into consumer loyalty. I don't have the time to go into that one, but it's very good, and if you know someone who already has it, you should play it together.
I would go on to pick up every game Telltale would publish after that point. And I want to talk for a little bit about one of their more controversial entries.
At one point, Telltale developed a series based on HBO's Game of Thrones, and this adaptation of an adaptation managed to do something special with the franchise that the show never did.
And possibly the books too. I only read the first one before remembering that my time has value.
The ending of the HBO series was hotly contested, to put it mildly. But before it got to that point, it had this reputation for killing off characters that you love. Fans of Game of Thrones would warn new watchers not to get too attached to any one person, because they can be unceremoniously murdered at a moment's notice. I think there was also a joy to be found in this too. Sometimes we crave experiences that leave us feeling emotionally vulnerable.
Horror, tragedy, and even slice-of-life media can prove to be not only entertaining, but useful when we otherwise struggle to feel fully human in our actual lives.
Grieving the death of someone you care about is such a deeply hard-hitting concept that it can be fairly easy to employ it in storytelling as a quick and dirty way to achieve an emotional reaction. That's not to say that writing a compelling character death is something just anyone could do effectively, but there's a reason death and grieving are such common themes in adult media. Game of Thrones milked this concept with every kind of death imaginable. Surprise deaths, premeditated deaths, unjust deaths that make you cry out in anger, justified deaths that make you shout with glee, loud massive deaths, and quiet lonely ones. Telltale's Game of Thrones doesn't have this breadth of death in its short span of 6 episodes, but the way it handles death is compelling in a different way. You play much of the game's first episode as the teenaged Ethan Forrester, making a number of critical decisions as the new heir after his father is killed. To a degree, Ethan is you, since you are the one making those choices. Ethan is later killed by Ramsay Snow, so his death reads very differently than it would were you just watching the show on television.
It feels like you have personally lost something, and if you're someone who already plays other games, you might also get the sinking feeling like you messed up, because protagonist's death typically comes with a game over screen.
Ethan is shown to be complex, full of potential, and the game makes you excited to be a part of his maturity as a leader and as a grown-up. And even if you find yourself so completely emotionally detached and purely look at this moment in terms of gameplay, House Forrester has just lost a very crucial asset, and the game makes you so aware of this fact that it still makes an impact. Telltale's Game of Thrones ends with a feeling of hopelessness and futility. No matter what choices you made, it more or less ends the same way, with the fates of many key characters unknown and the future of the house you sought to protect looking bleak, to put it optimistically. And at no point did the TV show ever make me feel this dread, this, wow, everything sure is fucked kind of feeling like the game did. When you see it happening to people you have no agency over, all you can say is, that must suck for them. But when you do have agency, the emotion changes to, this currently sucks for me. And admittedly, not a lot of players were happy with the series giving them this feeling, but I welcomed it and lauded Telltale's Game of Thrones for pulling it off so effectively. I think it's good that we have media that does this, that sometimes isn't satisfying or fulfilling of a power fantasy. Things that remind us that the future is uncertain and that not even stories are safe from turning out horribly.
Which I mean in the bleak and hopeless kind of way, and not the poorly written ending kind of way, but still both have value. I think if happy endings were a guarantee, even in the confines of escapist media, there wouldn't really be any sense of tension.
It's like if you're watching a series where a character dies, but it's revealed that there is an in-universe way for people to be resurrected and for everything to be fine again, the stakes of death no longer mean much. And for me, if stories always end happily or with their loose ends tied up, it kind of cheapens the whole experience for me.
They say it's about the journey and not the destination, but the destination can definitely impact how the journey goes.
I know a lot of people criticize the way Telltale went about their storytelling, and a common thing I would hear is how most of the time the stories ended approximately the same way no matter what choices you made. One essayist I found in my research found it deceitful that Telltale marketed their games on their interesting choice-based gameplay while not providing a multiple-ending, fully branching path structure.
And I can't really agree with this take because while I do also enjoy a choice-based power fantasy where my ending feels like it's all my own, not every narrative works with this kind of end goal.
These games had a story in mind they wanted to share. Hell, it's in the name, Telltale Games. Most of their choice-driven episodes begin with a screen saying that the story is tailored by how you play, and this phrasing is deliberate. They don't tell you it's going to completely change the entire direction of the narrative, or that every little thing you do is going to determine how gratifying the story is for you. It's tailored by how you play. Like how a literal tailor will make little alterations to your dress so it fits you better, but ultimately, no matter who they're tailoring for, it will end up as the same dress. And if you don't like the dress, or it's a size that was never going to fit you to begin with, that's a fault with the dress designer, not the tailor.
If you feel like the narrative of a Telltale game sucks in spite of your choices, that's a failure of the writing, not a failure of the decision-making mechanic. Though I will concede that constantly being told that characters will remember that is not as helpful as Telltale seem to think.
I can see where people are coming from who felt like at times your choices don't matter. For instance, there's a moment in The Walking Dead Season 1 where you're given a typical video gamey dilemma where two people are in danger, and in a split second you have to decide who you're going to help. It's presumed that the one you save will live and the other will die, but in actuality, one will always come out of this alive and the other will always die, no matter which you pick. You either save the little kid, whose dad comes in to save him regardless, or you try to save the big kid, whose fate is already sealed. After the fact, the little kid's dad remembers your choice, and it goes on to affect his opinion of you for the rest of the story.
So even if choices don't matter in terms of broad-scale outcome, they still carry some weight in the narrative, and I think that that's great.
I may have picked an example that aids my point, but there are other times when choices come to mean even less, and I don't think it's an invalid criticism to want more out of them. A major choice in The Walking Dead's third season once again sees you choosing one of two allies to save, this time in a hostage scenario where you don't have a lot of power. You're faced with an antagonist who is manipulative and plays mind games with the people they have power over. So when you choose a friend to keep alive, the villain will kill that friend and keep the other one alive instead, effectively doing the opposite of what you say. This choice made a lot of folks really upset, even though it's entirely in character for that villain to pull something like this. Plus, I liked the idea of you having to deal with the fallout of your friend suddenly feeling expendable. You said you were willing to kill this friend to save another, and now you both have to live with that knowledge. That's powerful.
Or at least it would be if this choice wasn't brought about way too late in the season for them to do anything big with it.
You're typically put into the position of a single character in a story, and as such, it's good to remember that the other characters are also written as people with agency. They are making choices of their own, some of them based on what you're doing, some of them with obstinance, sticking to their guns in spite of what you say. These worlds can be absurd and fantastical, but they're not a mystical sandbox where you magically have the power to compel everyone to your whim.
And I like it that way. I like when characters feel human and principled, and where trying to be a sweet-talking centrist who pleases everyone doesn't work. I mean, you're free to play it that way if you want, but it won't make everyone your friend.
I think the critiques of Telltale that hold the most weight are the ones about Telltale's handling of their respective licensed series. For one, the fact that practically everything they made was a licensed property owned by someone else to begin with. Aside from the rights-based issues that popped up after Telltale went under, this may have been more of an obstacle than a blessing. Suppose you were one of Telltale's lead writers. On the one hand, you effectively get paid to write fanfiction about well-known franchises like Batman. On the other, Warner Brothers has limits on what you can write about, where the story has to go, and what you can do with their characters.
I would have really loved to see Telltale try their hand at something fully original that didn't on some level feel like a cash grab.
Even just taking the various Telltale series for what they are, not everyone was happy with how some of them handled their stories. Tales from the Borderlands ended up being pretty well received, but initially there was a degree of backlash and uncertainty about how you could write a dialogue-heavy story in an over-the-top action-based world like that of Borderlands. Post-release, a number of folks were disappointed with Game of Thrones because it focused primarily on new characters that effectively don't exist in the show or the books. I even read a number of reviews criticizing Telltale's Guardians of the Galaxy because the character writing didn't feel as sharp and funny as it did in the movies.
Yeah, I wonder why the $100 million movie with A-list comedic actors felt funnier.
I don't know, these particular kinds of critiques have their place, but I wasn't really bothered by any of them personally. I know art doesn't exist in a vacuum, but adaptations will always feel different than their source material, and you can't blame them for that.
And I've put it off for too long, so now we have to talk about Minecraft Story Mode.
The first 4 episodes are pretty solid. You go from being a homely hero worshiper to a hero's companion, to finding out the heroes were frauds actually, to then having to step up and be the hero yourself. And that's a very serviceable conflict. The writers ask a lot of interesting questions about the responsibility of being celebrated, how to persevere when your role models let you down, and the concept of doing the right thing the wrong way.
These questions weren't explored perfectly or with enough depth or nuance for me to fully recommend, but given that it's for kids, and it's only 4 episodes, they did alright. But then they kept going. For 9 more episodes.
The first 4 of Season 1, which I just talked about, are a continuous story. The last 4 are self-contained little vignettes, and Season 2 is another continuous 5-episode story. And even though it's an awful structure, you have to play them in that order for the story to track. And playing them feels like a Saturday morning cartoon set in the world of Minecraft, and not in a good way.
I legitimately felt like I was watching a Toy Line tie-in TV show, which I probably actually was, come to think of it.
I don't have the time to nitpick it, and I definitely won't be replaying it anytime soon. I hope it'll suffice to say that the pacing is dreadful, the story is weak, and apart from some genuinely fun bits where you can choose what armor to wear or what item to craft to solve a problem, the moment-to-moment decision-making always feels arbitrary.
I couldn't even humor the game and hope that my decisions would be impactful in a satisfying way.
When I used to play chess with my brother, there would always be a tipping point in the game where I knew I had lost, and I couldn't strategize well enough to save myself. So rather than throw the game outright, I began making quick, chaotic decisions to maybe throw his brain for a loop and milk something interesting out of a game that had netted me nothing outside of a bonding experience. I called this my fun mode, and I never did this in any other game. Until Minecraft Story Mode, where I called it Chaos Mode whenever I chose to stop giving a shit and instead do the thing that I thought would be the funniest or the most interesting, even if it wasn't a choice I would personally make.
I did also do a Chaos Mode in Fallout 3 after it was apparent I would not enjoy playing such a poorly aged game, so I blew up Megaton.
Minecraft Story Mode isn't all bad. There are some story beats that work well, some twists that are genuinely exciting, and the voice acting is top-notch.
From the cast that are voice actors and not just Minecraft YouTubers anyway.
But nothing else works. It takes itself too seriously during its dramatic points and doesn't elegantly lean into the absurdity when it should. It tries to, but even ignoring the bad story and worse
gameplay,
it doesn't even manage to be funny. And if this whole essay were about Minecraft Story Mode, I would choose to discuss it as an example of casual ableism and lazy comedic writing. This series has exactly 2 jokes: meta jokes and ableism. No matter what, there's always a character who speaks a little differently, or has a tic, or anxiety, or gets excited about niche things. Meanwhile, the heroes roll their eyes and dismiss them all as weirdos while the story uses them as comedic punching bags.
It is constant, and it fucking sucks when I'm trying to stream it for an audience of people who have to deal with this kind of bullshit from their actual friends and family.
An important note is that while story-driven elements and dialogue options are the bread and butter of a Telltale-style game, they also have QTEs, or QuickTime events. Little sequences, usually action-oriented ones where you have to press an on-screen button, aim and fire, avoid obstacles, or some other kind of gameplay. And my primary criticism of Telltale's Minecraft is that it has even more of these than previous Telltale games, and they're all terrible. There isn't a good one in the bunch. But even putting that away, Minecraft Story Mode is a prime example of a universe that really does not benefit from the Telltale style.
And I'm glad we know this now, because otherwise I might have been convinced that the choice-driven style could work with literally anything.
Telltale had a bad habit of making the game so much more gamey than necessary. Laura Crone has an excellent video about gaming for a non-gamer, which I highly recommend. In it, she talks about visual novels and how nice of a gateway they can be into interactive media when done correctly. I've always liked sharing Telltale games with my friends, even the ones who otherwise don't play a lot of games, because it's generally easy to understand. You walk around, talk to people, and when it's time for you to reply, just press the button that corresponds to your response. Telltale's games used to be more along the lines of point-and-click adventures with more in the way of puzzle solving and exploration. But after they went the route of narrative focus and linear gameplay, I wish they had stuck to that path a little harder. Telltale was never quite ready to give up on their point-and-click roots, so we ended up with a lot of games that still have these remnants in the form of walking around puzzles, wonky shooting sequences, quick-time events, and things that just make them so muddy. Not to mention Minecraft Story Mode with all of its useless building segments, convoluted combat system, and nightmarish attempts to merge the Telltale style with the sandbox world it's based on.
They're not good or fun. They just create a metaphorical wall for you to jump over before you're allowed the privilege of enjoying more story.
It's like they're too simple for people wanting to play a traditional game, but too advanced for people who aren't already gaming regularly. It's a waste of time both ways.
And it sucks because it's a real accessibility barrier to an otherwise delightfully simple gameplay loop.
Plus, everyone I've shown a Telltale game to, and I mean literally everyone, has taken a moment to check their phone for a second, take a drink, something innocuous like that during a cutscene, only to find out there was a dialogue choice coming up that they couldn't respond to in time, so the game assumed they were choosing to stay silent, even though that wasn't the intention. It's frustrating, unnecessary, and nobody ever really benefited from it.
And I suppose you might suggest that if this kind of thing bothers me, then I should just play visual novels instead. Which, yeah, I definitely should play some more visual novels, but I don't know, they don't quite scratch the same itch for me.
I like when things are voice acted, and I like when I can see what's happening on screen like a movie. This isn't a critique of visual novels, they are the way they are for a reason, and there is loads of charm to be found in the medium. But a Telltale-style game is not the same thing as a visual novel, even though they both have similarities. Like books are to television, they each have their unique strengths. And that itch I mentioned is the reason I've taken the time to reminisce about Telltale's legacy. I like when games don't make me feel like I have to be an elite gamer all the time. I like stories that challenge the way I think about ethics. I like being put into situations where I feel human. I like being immersed into a compelling narrative where I feel some of what the characters feel. And when I'm given the privilege to have some small part in bringing that story to life, it feels good.
I want more stuff like that, and while I'm sure to get many replay hours out of the things that I bought before they went under, I don't think Telltale ever perfected the concept. But damned if they didn't make me optimistic that it could be done. Here, instead of a joke or an outtake, I want to ask if you know of any indie games that do the things that Telltale tried to do. Games with morally gray choices, grounded characters, and that don't have an emphasis on traditional gameplay elements. Interactive stories that are proud to be just that. If you have something in mind, feel free to share.